To celebrate Net Zero Week, I am delighted to be joined by Praveen Gopalan. He is the Sustainability and Climate Change Manager at Herbert Freehills, one of our fantastic ambassador companies. And I'm here today to talk to Praveen about net zero and really offer some practical, tangible tips for businesses of all sizes to think about in terms of reducing their carbon footprint. Praveen, it's really great to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Louise. It's a pleasure.
Super. So I think what I'd love to kind of kick off with is a really big, broad strokes question, which is really about why does net zero matter? Why should any of us really care about it?
Yeah, so net zero matters because climate change is real, and it is one of those things that we need to address soon. I am a through and through sustainability, CSR, ESG person, essentially all the things that companies want to do the right thing for people and the environment. And lots of companies have been wanting to do this for a very long time, but it's always been a nice to have bit. So as soon as there was like money constraints or time constraints, that was one of the first things that got dropped. Whereas now with net zero, it has become a thing that no one is dropping. It is one of those high agenda items that everyone is paying attention to. So I'm really happy that net zero is there, particularly because although net zero is climate focused, because of the way net zero is, essentially to get to net zero, there are two things to do. One, you reduce your emissions as much as you can. Two, what you can't reduce, you then offset. And if you do offsetting the right way and properly and use all credible offsetting, you can actually achieve a lot of the other benefits as well. So apart from climate, you can also look at biodiversity protection, so protecting the environment, but also a lot of the other human elements of like indigenous rights, keeping people like women and children in school, poverty alleviation. All of those things can be addressed by net zero. So I think it's unfortunate that net zero is important because of the state of the world is in, but it gives us a great opportunity to address the climate, but also everything else. And that's why I think net zero is really important, because it gives us that framework. It is important and everyone is putting the effort around it now.
That's fabulous. Thanks so much, Praveen. And you know what I love? I love that holistic vision, the way that kind of links into all the different sustainable development goals as well. Exactly. So if we do net zero, if we get started on it and we do it right, then we can have all these other impacts as well. That is really, really motivating and inspiring, actually. And kind of, I guess, picking up on that motivational side of things. If a business is at the start of their journey and kind of, I guess, just getting to grips with net zero, or if a business is on that journey but kind of struggling to keep that energy and momentum up, because oftentimes these are activities that a lot of companies are having to do off the side of the desk, especially for small and medium-sized businesses. Have you got any, I guess, insight or encouragement to help businesses that might be A, at the start of their journey, or B, kind of struggling to keep going with this?
Yeah, well, let's do the start of the journey first, because it is extremely complex and confusing and can be very frustrating, because there's like 10 different terms that people throw at you. There's net zero, there's carbon neutral, there's carbon positive, there's climate change, there's global warming. It is very confusing. There are also lots of, apart from the fact that there are lots of different terms, there are also lots of different organizations that are working in this space now. So there's things like the CDP, SBT, Science-Based Target Initiative. So there are these terms out there, and these terms are also constantly evolving. So it can be extremely confusing. So I think if you're just starting off, I'd almost say, don't worry about reading a lot of the stuff around it, because one, what you might be reading might be out of date. Two, a lot of it can be extremely technical. So I think first point is to have a conversation with someone who knows the area. So either go to a consultant or go to people like yourself, like Heart of the City have got your climate calls that you've run, Climate for SMEs. I think sign up for things like that. There's also the thing called the Climate Hub for SMEs. There are a variety of different resources out there. So speak to one of those people, or speak to another sister company or a competitor that has actually started on the journey. Having that conversation really, really helps, because that clarifies the things that you need to focus on, clarifies the right terms that you should be using at. And once you have that initial conversation, you can then go back and read the right things that are relevant to you. Because if you start on your own, it is going to be very difficult to navigate, because there's just so much out there. So have the conversation. And once you've had that conversation and you're starting to actually look at your own carbon footprint, again, I would say don't get bogged down on the detail, because you could spend hours and hours and hours trying to get something very perfect. So let's take, for example, commuter travel, like how our employees are coming into work. You could spend 3 days looking at whether Janet takes a bus and then a tube and then walks 20 minutes and then Sophie does that and Adiola does that. Don't worry about all of that. Really, in the very first element, look at your different areas of carbon, use proxies. So there are lots of proxies out there. Again, things like Heart of the City would be able to guide you into what to use. And those are things that say, for every pound spent on stationery, roughly equals to X amount of carbon. For every pound spent on IT, roughly X amount of carbon. Do that first, because then you get a very broad picture of where your major carbon emitters are in your business. And then based on that, you can then decide on what you want to work on and what you want to drill down to get actual data. Because you might realize that in your stationery, you've got pens and they're only 10% of your stationery budget, for example, carbon budget. But you might have that, you might be getting pens from Louise Clifton's super sustainable bamboo pens, or you might get Praveen's premium plastic pens, which are guaranteed to last 1,000 years in the saltier seawater. Both very different things. You might realize pens only 10%, in which case you might say, actually, it doesn't matter. But it could also be that pens are so easy to fix that actually I will just do it, although it's only 10%. But I'm going to spend most of my effort on paper, for example, because that's 75% of my stationery. So just having a very rough and ready calculation then helps you decide where to put your focus on and where you need to kind of delve further. So I'd say don't worry about getting it perfect. Just do something so you get a rough picture and then you can drill down.
Brilliant. That really aligns with something that we're often talking to SMEs about when they're thinking about starting. It's exactly what you said, which is, first of all, kind of like think about scopes 1 and 2. So if you're not familiar with the terms, just sort of thinking about where you're getting your energy from, starting with some things that you can really easily collect that data from. And then, like you say, you can kind of cascade that learning about how you start collecting that data to think about stationary, employee commuting. But I completely agree with you as well. It's just about taking some action, just getting going, really.
And just because you mentioned scope 1 and 2, thanks for bringing that up. Essentially, when you look at carbon, there are 3 scopes that are looked at. One is scope 1, which is fossil fuel that you directly burn. So that would be if you're building, if you use gas in your buildings, that counts. And also if you're buying petrol or diesel for your car, or if you've got a fleet, that is scope 1. Scope 2 is electricity. So electricity that you buy into your buildings or your offices. And scope 3 is everything else. So everything coming into the business and everything going out. So that'll be stationery, IT coming in, going out, the products that you create, how you travel to your companies, where you hold your meetings, all of that comes under scope 3. Scope 1 and 2 is essentially, so your energy that you directly burn and electricity is what people measure a lot and it's useful to know. But sometimes SMEs have got very little scope in actually being able to change that because you're a tiny office in a big office building and you don't control the landlord's relationship. But over time, with more people kind of, if SMEs club together and say, look, we want our landlords to start doing things, then you could push. But bear in mind, it can be, again, frustrating because you know this, it's a massive amount, but you can't change it immediately. So don't get disheartened. Appreciate the fact that you have to measure it and then you might be able to change it over time. But sorry, Louise, the other thing that you asked earlier on was about keeping the momentum. So once you get started, I think keeping the momentum, it's usually helpful to just be able to talk about those quick wins that you've done, the quick things that people can change, help people understand that there are certain things that you can't change, and that's why you can't change them. And in due course, we can change them. So things like renting of offices. At some point, you might say, actually, in 3 years' time, if this landlord doesn't change, when we are changing offices, we will go for a landlord that has got green energy. So having those sort of transition plans, having the fact that you're winning some things, you've got a pathway to winning the other things, just helps keep that momentum and helps people understand. And also, if you speak to everyone about it and help people understand what in their area of the business they can do, little steps makes people more engaged as well.
Brilliant. Yeah, I really appreciate you picking up on that second point, because I think, I don't know about you, but you get the sense that everyone wants to do something, and it's just about kind of figuring out where are some of your quick wins, like you say, and how do you kind of make sure that you're not just trying to change the entire world and the entire world that your business is operating in, but what are the things that you can do that are going to really inspire people and keep them motivated? Because I think this is going to be a journey. It's going to need everyone to pull in the same direction. And actually, speaking to that point about getting everyone on board, do you have any thoughts or ideas about how businesses can connect both internally with the, other employees, so changing that employee behavior, but also any thoughts or ideas around what businesses might think about when they're talking to their own supply chain or clients or people that they work with whilst they're kind of on this journey to reduce their emissions?
Yeah, so I suppose with if we take the client side or their supply, like business to business, SMEs are so different, right? Because it could be one person or it could be a larger company with like 25 people. And it's all going to be very different for each type of company. But essentially, if there are similar companies that you can club together with, if there are industry groups that you can join, that's usually very helpful. So prior to being at HSF, I led sustainability at BBC Studios, which is the commercial arm of the BBC. But the UK TV film industry have got a coalition and they've come together to help address some of those things. And so when you speak to your competitors, but kind of potentially have the same asks to our common suppliers, that helps as well. In the legal side, there are things like the Legal Sustainability Alliance, Net Zero Lawyers Alliance. So there are, again, companies clubbing together. So you are going to your suppliers with asking for the same thing, or potentially if you're a SME where you can partner with people. And so say, again, if you're going to pens, Louisa's pens might be really expensive if you're buying 100 units, but if you buy 500 units, the unit cost might be cheaper. So two companies could decide to actually procure it together, and that would be helpful. So it's kind of having those conversations, understanding that sometimes competitors can collaborate would be very helpful. And if there are industry bodies that you can join with, join industry bodies. If not, just have conversations. LinkedIn, networking events, all those sort of areas are great places to start having those conversations. And I suppose internally, having a network of green champions or a platform where people can talk about green stuff and voice things is usually very helpful. So again, with the whole movement towards being a more diverse and inclusive world, lots of businesses are having employee resource groups, so like diversity clubs, women empowerment clubs. Similarly, have something for green, where people can start coming up with the ideas. The only caveat there, I would say, is that when people come up with ideas, make sure we act on some of them, because there's nothing more frustrating than people coming up and giving ideas and then we don't act. And acting on them could be also saying that actually that's a great idea, but we can't do this now because of X, Y, and Z, or we are only able to do that in 2 years' time because of X, Y, and Z. But always respond to people's ideas. And that's a good way of kind of getting those ideas, because sometimes we're so bogged down in what we are doing that we might not see things that are easy fixes, but people can come up with them. So having those voice opportunities for people to voice is very helpful.
Brilliant. Yeah, I am completely on board with this idea of bringing, I guess also bringing people together who are passionate about it. They've already got that kind of inbuilt passion. And so you're kind of leveraging that to then gather those ideas. And I think also, there is no one person who can do all this on their own, is there really?
Exactly.
No one person is going to have that solution and then be able to action it.
Yeah. And it's extra work and time and resource. And so you need someone who's passionate to actually be able to put that extra amount of effort in it to start with. And once you embed it, then it becomes business as usual and then it's fine. But that initial kick, you need some sort of effort. And so having this passionate people, as you rightly pointed out, Louise, is very helpful.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Praveen. That's really, really helpful in terms of very practical actions. I'd love to pick your brains about what actually Herbert Smith Freehills are doing in this space as well. I'm sure you've got loads of kind of initiatives running, and yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Yep. So we do a variety of different things. We do stuff internally, and then we also do stuff through those collaborative teams that I mentioned earlier on. So internally, we have signed up for near-term science-based targets. So science-based targets is the initiative is a group of 4 charities that came together, because when people started talking about taking climate action and lots of people, companies started having net zero targets and saying things, there wasn't a uniform standard that people were adhering to. So if you scratched below the surface, companies were defining net zero very differently or defining reductions very differently. The SBTi gives us a framework where if you see an SBTi stamp saying we're aligned to that, you know exactly what they're trying to do. So we've aligned to that. And after that, two things that we've said we'll do is we'll reduce our travel by 35%, and we'll also work with our supply chain and get 55% of our supply chain to also have science-based targets. So those are two very actionable targets that we have that we're working on trying to achieve. Apart from that, we're also working collaboratively through things like the Legal Sustainability Alliance, Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, there's a Corporate Responsibility Legal Network, there's a thing called the Green Arbitration, there's a thing called Greener Litigation. So there are all these industry bodies coming together. And so we work with them as well. So we can collaboratively problem solve. And also no one is then looks at difficult to work with by our clients. So if we're all kind of saying, look, as a minimum standard, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, then we're not putting ourselves at a disadvantage. So those are the sort of ways we're working together. So we're either doing things internally or we're collaborating so that we change the industry as well.
That is absolutely fantastic. It's really inspiring as well. And I love the point that you mentioned a few times around collaboration. I think when we kind of get to the heart of this, there's a lot of really practical actions that businesses can take around net zero. But in order for us to kind of get there all together and get across the line, I think your point to working with others is really, really important. So Praveen, I've got one more question for you, which is just if you could pluck one top tip that you could give that an individual could take to perhaps reduce their carbon footprint, could you choose just one?
Yeah, so my tip, I'm going to be sneaky because I've got a tip which is don't waste, but I'm going to use an example which is food, which I think is something that I'm very passionate about because I think we all use it, we all need it, but we are very wasteful. Like a third of our food that we create or what we grow gets wasted instead of eaten. And a lot of it is in households as well, where we chuck stuff out. Because when we look at wasting, when you waste, you're wasting not just, so if I look at a tomato, it's not just the tomato that I'm wasting. I'll come back to that. But also if you're wasting money as well because you're buying stuff. So not wasting is beneficial. And when I said tomato, for example, when we go to the shops, there's often 2-for-1 deals. We're tempted to buy 2-for-1 packets of tomatoes. At the end of it, half of the second packet gets chucked because I've not eaten it in time. But I'm not just chucking 3 tomatoes because when you look at the tomato, you've got to grow the tomato. There's all the fertilizer that comes in, that manufacturer of the fertilizer, getting the fertilizer to the fields. All of that is there. You grow the tomato over many months, you harvest it, you have to transport it to a factory where it gets cleaned, so there's water used, and then you package it up, so there's all the plastic related, the packaging around the plastic and all of that. You then package it, it gets transported to your local supermarket, again, transport there. From there, it gets transported to my house. I then eat half of it and I chuck some of it in the bin. Then that gets transported to the waste facility, and there's all the stuff around there as well. So that one tomato that I'm throwing is actually not just one tomato. There's a whole amount of stuff around it that is being wasted as well. And really, to just fix that, all I have to do is buy those two. I'm not saying don't take advantage of 2-for-1s. Get 2-for-1. Half of those tomatoes, blend them, chuck them in the freezer. I've got pasta sauce for later. Similar with bananas, which again, people chuck a lot. Banana bread. So it's just about being a bit more mindful and thinking that's not just that one item that you're throwing. There's a whole host of things that's gone into creating that one item. But don't spend too much time thinking of all that whole host of things because that will be crippling the amount of effort and the amount of waste there is. Disregard that. Just think of it as more than just that tomato and don't waste it. And that's all I would say, like, don't waste things.
Brilliant. I am 100% on board with you. I absolutely love that advice. Thank you so much, Praveen. Your insights have been really helpful. You've given some really, really practical ideas. You've mentioned a ton of resources. Just to add on to that, Heart of the City have a free climate action toolkit for any SME based anywhere. Download, enjoy, use, adapt for your businesses. You mentioned the SME Climate Hub. Heart of the City also run a climate course that is free for any SME that is based or significantly operates in the city. There is a ton of resources out there, and I can completely hear what you're saying about utilizing the resources, connecting with others, and then going back and thinking about, okay, what are the next actions for my business? So thank you so much, Praveen.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.